All right, everybody, it's time to make more videos that are going to be flagged and censored and never watched. The left is better at moralizing capitalism than the right. I'm using quotes over the words left and right because I don't think that either of those two groups are monolithic. I'm using the word moralizing here to mean making into a good thing something that is bad, neutral, or amoral. Many years ago, several figures were attempting to moralize capitalism through various utilitarian, objectivist, and libertarian arguments. Although their arguments weren't so bad, their ideas did not penetrate into the university because there existed other ideas, mainly Kantian ideas or Aristotelian ideas or various other ideas of value. Many types of Kantian ontology had ethics that derived from it. One of those ethical principles was to treat people as an end in themselves, rather than a means to an end, which is almost the opposite of the selfishness, greed is good mentality that was being put forward as a continuation of Aristotle from the people like Ayn Rand. Although these people changed what right-wing meant, there was quite a big difference between the classic conservatism and the more neoliberal renditions of conservatism, with Milton Friedman being its head. But such questions still persist in the right-wing debates today, questions of morality of economics. A right wing, which as a Canadian conservative debate showed, a right wing, which as the Canadian conservative debate recently showed, it doesn't exactly know what it means to be right wing today. It seems like there's more diversity on what it means to be right wing than what it means to be left-wing. Being left-wing is much more monolithic in a way. Of course, there is that Donald Trump Republican Party kind of thing where everybody has to march lockstep with the party. Of course, that kind of thing still exists on the right, and traditionally that's where it existed. These debates are, for example, about whether the marketplace is amoral, a good thing, or a Christian thing, like the question of interests, or what it means for Jesus to throw out the money changers from the temple. The classic conservative position is rather that everything should have its own place, aka the market should not invade the church, the family, and if we can help it, not invade politics as well. With Dwight D. Eisenhower's famous speech about how an economic monster known as the military-industrial complex, an economic entity, was beginning to almost dictate and lobby and pull the strings from within our governmental institutions. So that's the classic conservative position, that economics shouldn't be invading these different types of so-called sacred realms, especially a government that decides whether to go to war or not. So the neoliberal institutions have taken over that question for a long time because of the military-industrial complex, which the classic conservative Dwight D. Eisenhower position shows. The economic dimensions of our lives have a certain dimension. It's not just every aspect of our life. Another more crude example is the current revolt against so-called globalism, which from my eyes is a skewed understanding and lashing out at something difficult to understand, which is neoliberalism. Another important distinction here is with the idea that fascism is necessarily capitalist. It's not. And this was exemplified most clearly in the middle of World War II, when the Nazis decided to divert resources from the war effort, the obvious economic decision, the rational economic decision, so as to maintain the killing camps. So they diverted resources from the war and they put resources into maintaining these killing camps, and an insane decision which reaffirms that fascism has greater gods than the marketplace. So what do I mean by the god of the market or the neoliberal order? Well, for here, we can turn to Nietzsche. He explained that all philosophy and religion of the past does not actually answer any of my difficult questions about existence, philosophy, ethics, law. They all have failed. But now there is a much longer story here that can help us escape from the neoliberal, which I have spelled out elsewhere. You can check out my Ritual Traces series. But for now, we understand that within our desert of nothingness and meaninglessness, if you follow the rituals of your religion and pray to your God, you probably won't get an answer. But if you follow the rituals and pray to the god of the market, you will indeed get an answer. You succeed or not. The market here asks acts as an arbiter of truth. And this is what Foucault refers to as a site of verediction, the market being a site of verediction. That is, the market logic of commodity exchange is the most reliable source or form of social science today. And even social science and science itself is subject to research and funding and all the political economic decisions that go into funding the military industrial complex once again. So we have liberal universities that say one thing, and on the other hand, they are funding tactical nukes and all these crazy technologies. Meanwhile, though the right is continually having these debates about whether capitalism is good or whether capitalism is Christian and compatible with Southern hospitality, the left has taken on a wholly different route altogether: capitalist realism. For the Engelsian left, there is and never was a distinction or line in the sand that separates the realm of economics and the family and the church or politics. It's all a matter of materialism and economics. Although obviously we are only talking about the industrialization places, as kinship structures throughout the world make non and even anti-economic decisions all the time for the sake of maintaining various traditions or for their family structures or for their culture. But the left has a much more thorough way of moralizing capitalism with the use of standpoint epistemology. And for this, you need to look up the essay entitled "The Similarities Between Market Liberalism and Standpoint Epistemology." Standpoint epistemology is what fuels the idea that within intersectionality that we can shut down and deplatform people that have reprehensible ideas in the public sphere, fundamentally changing the old liberal order of "I don't like what you're saying, but I will fight to the death to protect you for saying it." Please check out that paper for an in-depth study of that. Some of the left was thus engaging in the same market naturalism, aka seeing the market as a natural thing found even in nature, that some of the right wing was doing. But the left is the one who accuses the right of being market naturalists or of naturalism. That is, especially when it comes to gender as well. That is, by assuming that kin-based relationships were never free from economics, this indeed became a self-fulfilling prophecy on the left, thus pretty much destroying our social relationships and turning everything into capitalism, social capitalism, and this following the rituals and the ways of these cultural idioms that have commodified our emotional relationships with one another. And we can't even have a non-economic relationship with other people anymore. From another light, this was a concession of capitalist realism that was much more powerful and form of capitalist realism that the right had never mustered. Market logic helped to conflate some obvious issues. The left kept repeating over and over that they wanted to take down the hetero-patriarchal, capitalist, racist, etc. system, when clearly it was the case that patriarchy has a different god than the god of the market. Patriarchal democracy, for example, asks its sons to die in the war for the sake of defending the demos, and its daughters, that is, to protect the god of the city. The logic following the neoliberal god would tell you that the nation state isn't really a thing, and to die for it is a bad economic decision. So that's the neoliberal subjectivity versus the old patriarchal subjectivity. Regardless, the obfuscations continued in leftist circles because critique itself was killed and subject to social capitalism itself. You can't even do research if you don't already agree with the premises that the intersectionality has prepared for you. You were not allowed to critique the claims of intersectionality because that could probably mean you have hate towards some group or another. Instead, we were supposed to challenge our racist and sexist and biases and presumptions, not speak and let those in more oppressive situations the ability to platform their own ideas. The people who care need to hesitate, and the people who haven't had a voice need to get a form of platforming. Really, what happens in this situation is that there's a completely different culture that develops. The only people who care were the ones who are willing to shut up in the first place. And now it's only the narcissists that speak in the public sphere, the most intense narcissists. Soon, however, a culture of deplatforming produced instead a world where critique was no longer possible at all. And this world was only recently opened up to me as when you try to do research about this topic, you can see that this kind of social capitalist feminist world has been created since the 60s, and research itself has been stifled for a very long time. And you can see how most of these men's rights people, which I am not, most of them were ex-feminists like me. Instead of seeing critique as a way of loving someone or as a way of showing your love, it instead became a form of abuse. Critique became abuse. And because these ideas penetrated into this discipline of psychology, almost everything soon became abusive. Abuse is abuse is abuse. You don't owe anyone anything. It is too much emotional labor to educate you. These idioms started to envelop all of our social relationships and envelop it with inauthenticity. Everything became a matter of Butlerian performance. This is what the right calls virtue signaling. Please search an epidemic of idioms killing solidarity. It's my other YouTube video. What is interesting here is that both leftist American Psychological Association intersectionality psychology and right-wing evolutionary psychology are critical of the very valid critique of virtue signaling. The best critique of virtue signaling was the Black Mirror episode Nosedive. As you are already prepared, as you are already probably aware in American politics, rarely is something bipartisan and also a good thing. Most bipartisanship is where we can find the pinpoint the policies of the empire itself. Soon, all human interactions became a matter of emotional labor and privilege calculation, fed by our constant insecurities to be both moral and be economic. The logic of the market had succeeded in attacking the various deepest roots of our relationships with one another, love itself becoming an emotional labor and privilege calculation. In fact, if one is not engaging in the emotional labor and privilege calculation in a relationship, if one is willing to throw themselves onto a bus to save their spouse, this was both economically and psychologically unhealthy to be attached. One was actually being patriarchal if one was doing that. If you are wanting to actually invest into a relationship, you must have something wrong with you. So even the deepest recesses of our minds have become a cost-benefit analysis too. Should I share this thought with the one who I love at this present context, or am I being an undue burden? Everything is a hesitant question like that, and those hesitant questions only affect who? The people who are actually not narcissists, while the people who are narcissists are thriving and they get to be the ones who exploit surplus labor and then be worshipped at the same time, without any moral qualms. The people without moral qualms get to win. Improvisation in relationships is gone. So where Zizek talks about in his video called Our Fear of Falling in Love is what I'm talking about. Unfortunately, the worst part about this whole situation is that critiquing it is not allowed. Critiquing this culture is historically not allowed. It hasn't been around for the last 50 years. And you really need to go out and search where those critique of this kind of culture came, because when you actually critique it, it's called hate speech. This kind of critiquing of capitalism is now a form of hate speech. In sum, while the right continues to debate the ethics of the market relationships, the left has fully succumbed to capitalist realism that is not allowed to be critiqued. Not only is critique banned, but it is not allowed to even talk about the banished. And the left even continually denies that any sort of censorship and platforming strawman culture has developed at all. So thank you for paying attention. Thank you for dealing with me in my bathrobe. And I wish you all the best in our trying to create authentic human relationships in our cyberpunk dystopia. Much love, sweet dreams.